The Unchosen Bride, a Wyoming legend. The sun sat low over the rolling plains of eastern Wyoming, turning the tall grasses into waves of amber fire. In the distance, the silhouette of the tiny frontier town of Red Rock Junction stood like a mirage. A cluster of dusty buildings, a lone church steeple, and a rickety water tower that groaned with every passing wind. It was 1878, and in a land where opportunities were as scarce as rain, people clung to every scrap of hope they could find. But for Nora Ellison, hope had been a bitter friend. The woman no one chose. Nora grew up just outside Red Rock Junction, the daughter of a homesteader and a schoolteacher. She was smart, capable, and beautiful in a quiet sort of way, but she was also a woman ahead of her time. She could ride, rope, and shoot with competence that rivaled any of the local boys. She could mend fences, write business letters for men who hated their own handwriting, and she had a laugh that sparkled like the little bighorn under the morning sun. Yet still, she was unchosen. By her 29th year, an age that, in those times, seemed ancient for a woman not yet married, Nora had watched younger, frailer girls be swept away by hopeful suitors. She saw them twirl in their Sunday dresses in the churchyard while she stood on the sidelines, clapping politely. She heard the whispered remarks from old ladies at the mercantile, "Quite the lady, but too headstrong. Needs a man to calm her spirit. Not made for a wife's role." 6 times, she had been courted. 6 times, she had been rejected. The dance at Baxter's Feed. Red Rock Junction was small, and news traveled at the speed of prairie wind. So when the neighboring settlement of Baxter's Crossing announced a dance, practically the whole county came. Nora, at first, stayed home. She had work to do, but her sister Tess insisted she go. "You need to live a little, Nora. Even someone wild and restless needs a two-step now and then." And so she went, boots polished, hair braided, eyes bright with a rare flicker of hope. The dance was held in a big barn lit with lanterns that swung like captured stars. Horses stamped outside, couples laughed over cups of coffee, and the fiddler played rhythms that made hearts pound. Nora stepped inside and felt, for the first time in many months, that maybe, just maybe, this night held something new. But as the hours wore on, the same patterns repeated. Men paired off with younger or quieter women. Gentlemen excused themselves from dancing with her, offering polite compliments that brimmed with pity rather than admiration. By midnight, a weary Nora slipped off her dancing shoes and stepped out into the cool air. She leaned against the rail by the stables, watching flickers of moonlight on the prairie. That's when she heard the footfalls, steady and measured, like someone who had seen many miles of open land. The cowboy on the edge of town. He was tall, with a weathered hat and a long coat that bore the scent of sagebrush and horsehair. His boots were scuffed, his face was sunburnt, and his eyes held a quiet depth, like someone who'd been around long enough to understand pain, joy, and the space in between. "You okay?" he asked. Nora didn't know his voice, but something in its calm made her answer without hesitation. "I'm fine. Just thinking." He chuckled, a low sound that didn't flirt, it just was. "You look like someone who carries thoughts heavier than most." He studied her face briefly. "Name's Caleb Boone." She hesitated. Polite introductions weren't usually her style, but she extended her hand anyway. "Nora Ellison." They stood in silence for a beat, 2 figures against the vast expanse of prairie, listening to the whispers of wind and distant laughter from the dance. Stories under the stars. Caleb didn't ask her about her past. He asked her about her thoughts. About the wind, the drought, the strange quiet of frontier towns that were always on the brink of hope and despair. Nora found herself telling him things she hadn't spoken aloud in years. She spoke of her dreams of owning land, of raising cattle, of building a schoolhouse where girls and boys learned the same education. Caleb listened, truly listened, and when she paused, he asked thoughtful questions, not idle ones. "You know," he said finally, "most folks here worry more about what others think than what they actually want. You seem unbothered by that." Nora blinked. "Thank you. I think." He smiled, that quiet kind that didn't try too hard. "That honesty's rare around here." They talked until the moon sank low and the first birds of dawn began their lonely chorus. Eventually, Nora realized she had forgotten her earlier disappointment from the dance. She had forgotten the eyes that had judged her, the whispers of neighbors who thought a strong woman was too much trouble. And when Caleb finally tipped his hat and walked back toward town, she felt lighter than she had in years. Rumors and tension. The next day, as Nora rode into town for supplies, whispers followed her like shadows. "Did you see her out with that strange cowboy? Betty's just passing through. She must think she's too good for all of us." But Nora paid them no mind. Caleb appeared occasionally over the next weeks, once at the general store, another time helping lift a fallen fence rail, and once leaning against the churchyard fence with that same thoughtful expression. People in town scratched their heads. "He's not from around here. Where'd he come from? What's he after?" No one seemed to consider that maybe he was just someone who saw Nora for who she was. The storm that changed everything. Late summer brought a storm, a fierce one, rumbling like a beast in the distance and then crashing upon the plains with thunderous fury. Wind snapped trees like twigs, and lightning cracked the sky in violent spurs of light. Water flowed in angry rivulets, and barns that had stood for decades groaned and leaned under the strain. When the storm hit, Nora was out at the north pasture checking on her small herd. The rain found her quick, and the wind tugged at her hat like hands trying to pull her back. Her horse, a loyal paint named Whisper, shied in panic. That's when she heard a voice cut through the howl of wind, strong, calm, steady. "Nora, down here." She turned to see Caleb, bracing himself against a post near the fence line. Without hesitation, she steered Whisper toward him. Before she could speak, he helped her dismount, securing the reins and guiding her toward shelter. The storm battered them, but together they made it to a small windbreak. They huddled there until the worst passed, soaked, exhausted, and strangely exhilarated. When the rain finally eased, Nora looked at Caleb with awe in her eyes. "You just saved me," she said simply. He smiled, the same quiet, thoughtful kind of smile. "I'd like to think we saved each other." Nora looked away for a moment, heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. A shift in the town's heart. Word of Caleb's help spread rapidly through Red Rock Junction. When people heard that Nora had been caught in the storm and this stranger had rescued her, opinions began to shift, though reluctantly at first. At the Mercantile, old Mrs. Harper said to anyone who would listen, "Well, I suppose maybe he's not so bad. At least he has manners." Some men grumbled about a new stranger making waves in their quiet town. Some women whispered, "Isn't it about time Nora settled?" But as days passed, more townsfolk began to see what Nora had always seen, that Caleb carried no arrogance, no desire to belittle anyone. He simply looked at people, truly looked. Caleb stayed longer than a passing stranger usually did. He helped repair storm damage, tended to horses at the livery, and offered a steady hand wherever it was needed. Occasionally, he found Nora helping others too, repairing a roof, teaching the children to read, or cooking meals for neighbors who were ill. Together, they became a force of good, quiet, dependable, and unexpected. The dance of choice. Late fall brought another dance, this time, back in Red Rock Junction. The old barn had been cleaned and freshly lit, and a new fiddler had arrived from Denver. Nora's sister Tess insisted she dance. Nora hesitated, the memory of 6 previous disappointments still stung, but when Caleb offered his arm, she accepted. They danced under lantern glow, surrounded by neighbors who now watched with admiration rather than judgment. The rhythm of the fiddle carried through the rafters, and under that warm light, Nora felt something like peace, and maybe even joy. When the dance ended, folks clapped. Some whispered words of encouragement, others smiled in genuine appreciation of the pair. And for the first time in a long while, Nora didn't feel like the unchosen bride, she felt like someone chosen, respected, and understood. A new chapter begins. As winter approached, Caleb remained in Red Rock Junction. And on a crisp December morning, in front of the little church with frost on its windows, Nora and Caleb stood side by side. There was no grand announcement. No dramatic speech. Just 2 people who'd met in the quiet moments, under stars, through storms, and across the plains, and realized they had found in each other something rare and true. When Nora's father gave her away, with a proud smile, the town watched on not with judgment but with warmth. They saw that love had its own way of growing, sometimes slow, sometimes unexpected, and that a person like Nora, with fire in her heart and strength in her hands, deserved someone who saw her worth all along. Epilogue. The legend lives on. Years later, folks would still tell the story of Nora Ellison and Caleb Boone, how the woman who had been overlooked by many became the heart of her community, and how a wandering cowboy saw something others had missed. Children heard the tale at bedtime. Young couples recounted it at dances. Old-timers spoke of it by the stove in the general store. And in every telling, the message was clear. True worth isn't measured by how many choose you, but by the one who truly sees you. And so, on the wide and silent plains of Wyoming, two souls who had once been overlooked found everything they were searching for in each other, proving that true love always arrives right on time, never too early, never too late. Subscribe for more heartfelt stories.